Good evening, everyone. All right. Lately, for the past week or so, we've actually been under high pressure, which has produced this heat wave we've now currently experiencing. Very low humidity, and occasionally some gusty winds, but normally pretty light. And that's going to last for about another half of a day. We are looking at low pressure moving into the Oregon and Washington area, and to its south it'll be dragging a cold front through this area on Thursday night, so it's tomorrow night. So what we'll see tomorrow is a gradual increase in clouds, which will take the edge off the temperatures, and we'll be back to still a lot of low elevation temperatures in the low 90s, but most temperatures in the 80s, humidity slightly up. But what fronts really bring that is a detriment to most firefighters is some pretty strong and gusty winds. So we have that to look forward to. Fortunately for us, and fronts can also bring thunderstorms and lightning, which this one will as well. And so the National Weather Service in Reno, who serves this area, has issued what's called a fire weather watch, which means there is potential for critical fire weather conditions, and that would be for Thursday night and Friday. So what's happening on Thursday night is when the front passes through in the late night hours, winds will start to gust, and we'll actually be getting some rain. Now the air is unstable enough to generate some thunderstorms, but they should be really isolated in coverage, which means roughly 10 to 20% of the area might actually be affected by a thunderstorm. The rain will be a little bit more widespread. It's pretty likely that at least 60% of the area will get some sort of measurable rain, which would be 1/100 of an inch. But even if an area got 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch, which is pretty unlikely, that's not going to make up for 15 months of drought. It's just not. The fuels are very receptive. So this front's going to be very quick hitting. We'll see the temperatures between Thursday and Friday drop 15 degrees. And when you see those kind of drops, 10 to 15 degree temperature drops, that means it's a pretty strong front. So we are lucky in that it's coming at night for the most part, and so the winds won't be quite as bad. Winds get a lot stronger when the afternoon sunshine helps to bring down the high velocity winds down to the surface. But that won't happen with the front. It's going to wait until after the front passes on Friday, which is pretty typical. It waits until the afternoon, and then the winds are going to take off on Friday. So on Friday, we're looking for winds gusting to around 38 miles an hour, which is very strong. And the temperatures, the sky will have cleared already between Thursday and Friday, and already the temperatures will start warming up again. We're looking for the humidity to sort of level off, but that's only because, I mean, it really gets really dry or dries quickly because that morning, a lot of the relative humidities will be over 80%, and yet it's still going to get down into the teens for some locations later on during that day. So it's a very quick hitting, storms out of here. And then after that, Saturday is a pretty tranquil day in terms of not a whole lot of wind. Temperature, though, starts to warm up. Relative humidity start going down again. And that trend is going to slowly continue for the rest of the week and through the weekend and into the early part of next week. So not out of it yet, and while any little bit of rain helps, it's not going to help in a big, significant way.
Good evening, Tobin Kelly with Fire Behavior. So talk a little bit about today. So today, was a significantly different day than the previous few days. Much less intense fire activity across the main part of the fire. Fuels are burning out, and that's working pretty well, and the control actions are actually, really starting to take hold. So what we saw today over here in the Devil's Punch Bowl, still some continued hot spots out there. Nothing really moving around too much, but poking up through the timber there and just being persistent off in that steep avalanche chute country and the timber up there. Rolling all the way down along Grizzly Ridge and over to Turner Ridge. There was a couple of hot spots popped up there. No big threat to the line, but still some available fuel fairly close to the line, and that's to be expected. But no big deal, especially with the wind keeping it pushed back into itself. And again, all the way across through Red Clover, Horton Ridge, Dixie Valley, and over to Dixie Mountain. Very favorable winds, much less fry activity than we've seen over the last couple of days. Same thing all the way around up on the escarpment. Some activity there last night. Those escarpment winds that we didn't see for quite a while are making themselves felt now as that wind comes down off that escarpment, pushes downhill, finds some hot spots, and pushes them down towards the highway. So that was still a point of concern there. So as Jack said, we're going to see a big weather change here. We're going to start seeing some continued windy weather, and then as this front really moves in, some very windy weather. Humidities are going to come up, but as dry as these fuels are, that'll help a little bit, but that's not going to make a huge difference. But considering what the fire activity we have now, this is where we start talking about the potential fire activity. So, that's going to be the concern, is that we're still going to have interior pockets burning out, but the big concern with these winds is that if something does want to cross some of the lines, spot out, and where that's going to push it. The southwest and west winds, as we say, one side of the fire, the winds are always favorable, one side not favorable. But those continued south and southwest winds should be favorable for this whole south end of the fire. Up here, that's parked in the old Walker fire scar. This line right here in Division Oscar, south winds will be a little unfavorable for it. Southwest to west winds will be favorable. So it all depends on how the winds want to push across this part of the line here. This whole part of the fire, is all parked in the Sugar Fire scar from this year. This is looking pretty good. Much lighter fuels up here, so that's not looking too bad. The concern still is going to be where this fire is sitting and what hot spots remain on the escarpment as those winds push down. So that's probably going to be the most potential for fire to come out here. So again, we're at that nice point of the fire. We can start talking about potential fire behavior and see what happens as we move through this cold front that Jack talked about. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to present a video update from the West Zone featuring Operations Section Chief Tony Brunel of CAL FIRE.
Good evening. My name is Tony Brownell from CAL FIRE Incident Management Team 1, Deputy Operations for the West Zone. I'm going to go over a quick little update for you. Branch 1, 5, and 7 are holding very well, and mop-up patrol status, no new issues in there today. Branch 9, same. Just do mop-up patrol, getting in there, getting our mop up in there as far as we can, going for the smokes that are visible, making sure that line is secure. Branch 13 is where we're having issues, and this is where everybody needs to pay attention. The fire has increased significantly in the last half an hour. The fire is outside our primary line, but still within our secondary, but it's making a significant run to the northeast. It's burning actively, faster than we keep pace with it. So we have resources shifting over there, and we have a lot of resources already in place. We're trying to keep it from crossing 44, but we just got notification we do have a spot fire on the other side of 44 up near Poison Lake. So we're working on getting crews in there to keep it in check. Old Station, be prepared to leave. If you get an evacuation order, we need you guys to pack and get ready and move northward out of the area so we can get in there and fight fire and save your property. This fire is very intense. We do not want anybody in front of it. We're going to get in there and do the best we can to save all the structures in place, but be prepared to leave if you get the evacuation warning. Same with Branch 16. The wind we're getting is pushing from the southwest to the northeast. It's pushing hard against our line. We do have a spot fire outside in Quebec that we're trying to get around, but is resistant to control. So right now we have a lot going on the top of the fire. We have a lot of resources in place. It's getting very dynamic. So moving on to the rest of the fire, we're doing good down in the Westwood in the Almanor area. Janesville's looking very good. We still have some hot spots down the bottom of it. And on the 395 corridor, we have crews pushing up from the bottom of 395 to the Black Mountain site. That should be completed today to keep the fire from going north towards Milford. We're also working down into the left flank of the finger, going into Squaw Peak. We're working that very hard and getting it mopped up because we're concerned the wind's going to surface down here as well. So we have crews in place to take care of that. To reiterate, this is our problem right now. It's very dynamic, and we'll keep you advised as soon as we get more information. Thank you.
Next up is Jeff Serber, Operations Section Chief.
Thanks, Toby. So for the update tonight, I'll go ahead and start. Let's start over at Devil's Punch Bowl. That fire hasn't moved much. The helicopters pretty much kept it in check for the last several days, and we inserted about 40 people in there today from the top and the bottom. They're picking their way in there, trying to find the hot spots and take care of those. They did request one additional crew. I know before we talked about just putting a few folks in there, but as they got in there, they're starting to feel much more comfortable with getting more people in there and taking care of that area quicker. So, we still hold out the opportunity, let's say, to burn if we need to, but we want to go direct on that. Firefighter safety is a real concern in there, but they have found a way that they think they can work that safely and go in there and wrap that and then start moving inward slightly and pick up some more heat. So that's good news. We'd prefer not to burn that out, and time, we've been patient with it and figured out a way to deal with it. And the weather's been cooperative. It hasn't really gotten up and moved a lot during those windy days. So that's where we're at there in Devil's Punch Bowl. Coming around on Division Romeo, that stretches pretty much from Grizzly over to Lake Davis. That hasn't moved for probably 4 or 5 days. We're in that mode where we keep moving that equipment farther forward that was there and picking up some of our equipment that's there because we're starting to feel comfortable with that area on the line. One thing I will say, because of the weather conditions that are coming that you just heard about, we are not moving out of these areas too quickly. We pay attention to that, and we'll leave plenty of folks in there to be watching that in case we get erratic winds and thunderstorms. We need to have those eyes on the ground to make sure that trees don't torch or throw something that unexpected and nobody's there to see it. So we want to identify those rapidly if and when that happens. Moving up from Lake Davis, going north through Turner Ridge, and then that's been good. Getting pretty cold. You can see if you look at our infrared, you can see that there's very few spots left out there, which shows scattered heat. So the heat signatures are going down dramatically in there, and I know it's been talked about, but the fuels are so dry that they're consuming much more rapidly than they do on some of the other fires that we've been on and in some other areas that have more moisture. So the interior heat in the fire is burning out a lot quicker. And then moving over from that area, Red Clover, and then over on to Horton Ridge. That I saw a helicopter working there maybe an hour and a half ago, and I drove down the 177 supporting crews in there. So there was a little bit of aircraft use right there. There's a point out there where that's several miles long, and rather than stretching hose all the way out there, and there is no way to get a vehicle out there, sometimes those crews will call for helicopter support. They'll bring buckets. The crews will open up that material that's on the ground, and then they'll get out of the way, and the helicopter will drop water on it and help them stir it, help them, give them something to stir into the ground and put that out. So very minimal use of aircraft in here today, but it was used slightly. Moving over to the old Sugar Fire, this all is starting to look really good. When I came by, couldn't even really see any smoke. A lot of retardant up here going up to Dixie Mountain that was dumped a couple days ago in order to enable the crews to construct hand line up to that fire. So this whole area in here is just remarkably looking remarkably better than it was a couple of days ago, due to both a lot of hard work of the firefighters as well as that southwest wind that's been pushing on it, and those breezes help things burn out also and make the smoke dissipate a lot quicker. Into the Sugar Fire, this whole piece in here is caught up in the fire. Don't expect that to move. This piece right in here, this is an island of about 2,000 acres. It has a dozer line here. I drove through that today. It all looks good. There's not much heat up in there, and we expect that piece of ground to stay green. Then coming off the rim, this burned down to the highway a couple nights ago, and then another chunk burned down last night. We had folks in there. Some of the folks got off their engines and walked the line and tried to see if there was any heat left in that sagebrush and taller brush along that area to try to prevent what's happened the last 2 nights in there where they had to close the highway. So that's pretty much what they did in there today. We had 3 crews work that piece of line from the bottom of the dozer line up the escarpment, and they did a lot of good work in there. They asked, I believe they were going to ask for a little bit of water this afternoon, but they didn't ask for any retardant or water during the day, and that's indicative of how much that line had cooled down. So what they were doing is they'll open up those areas that they find that are hot, they'll open it up to the air, and they'll start to burn out better that way, and then they'll wait till late in the afternoon, call for a helicopter, and then they'll have targets for them, basically, where they've opened up that material and have them come in and just hit a bunch of targets at the same time with one fuel cycle on the helicopter in effort to be more efficient than calling the helicopter back and forth every time they need a couple of drops. So that's kind of what went on there today. This area line in here from the escarpment back over all the way pretty much through this hazardous area and all the way back, all this dozer line coming through Squaw Valley and then back over to the Walker Fires looking good. One thing I would point out, this is about 15 miles of rough country where those 2 fires came together, and there will be a time in the future more than likely where this whole piece will turn black. We'll go ahead and consider that contained. When I flew yesterday, it's not trying to get through that fire at all from what I could tell when I flew. So rather than putting people out there on 15 miles of rugged line and making them walk along that edge, we look at the vegetation that's grown back in a 2-year-old fire, and we fly it and look at it, and we come to the determination eventually that that's a contained edge, and that's what's happened in a few other places on this fire. Might happen eventually on this chunk here where it bumped up against the Walker Fire, and this chunk that bumped up against a two-month-old fire there, and Sugar Fire from the Beckwourth Complex. Lastly, I would say that one thing I haven't brought up a lot is night shifts. We do have over 250 people out there tonight. We'll keep that beefed up in numbers because we want to keep an eye on all this country in here that has the potential to cause either disruption to the highway or problems for residents. And then also the Dixie Valley area, we focus on those 2 areas. We also keep the night shift over at Taylorsville. So we have over 250 people out there spread far and wide, and that's one thing I wanted to point out tonight, that sometimes I fail to mention that how large that night shift is and how much we expect it to continue. Taylorsville, as far as, I believe the residents went back in there today. As far as this fire's opportunity to escape, it's going down every single day. It went down a little bit today. Every time those guys get in there, they're rock hopping, they're getting down in there and putting fire out on the ground. They're using helicopters to do that. So you're going to see, for the folks in Taylorsville, you'll see those helicopters flying. That doesn't necessarily mean it's heating up. Those helicopters are bringing water to the crews so they can cool it down. So each day that goes by, I would expect you to look up there and see less and less smoke. We are going to try to get 1 additional crew in there tomorrow, so that would be 60 people. And in a period of a day or 2, I think you're going to be happy looking up there with the amount of smoke that you saw, let's say today or yesterday, as compared with what you'll see in a couple of days. So a lot of progress there around in the Devil's Punch Bowl above Taylorsville.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, now we have Plumas County Sheriff Todd Johns.
Good evening. I'm Sheriff Todd Johns. I'd first like to start by recognizing that on this day, 1 year ago, the North Complex fire burned out of Plumas County into Butte County, where it took the lives of 16 people and destroyed nearly 2,500 structures. I'd like to take just a moment and ask for a moment of silence in the memory of those folks. Thank you. As was previously indicated, today I reduced the mandatory evacuation order for Taylorsville and Genesee, and as well as warnings for several other areas along the north side of Highway 70 from the east side of Quincy to the Beckworth that were lifted from warnings and went to no order. I know there's been a bit of discussion on Taylorsville, and just to reiterate, for the folks at Taylorsville, until you see this line go black, you just need to be aware of what's going on around you. As we've seen over the last 50 days, this fire has surprised us on numerous occasions, and I don't want the folks in Taylorsville to be surprised. It doesn't mean that I'm concerned, but as long as there's smoke there and that line is red, I want you to be cognizant of that and just be vigilant, please. And then for folks, I ask that you go on for the evacuation maps, go to community.zonehaven.com, and that'll show the current evacuation orders and where it's their warnings and so on and so forth. Damage assessment is ongoing. You can check the Plumas County website under the Dixie Fire tab for the status of your property. And some properties have not been assessed yet, and those are primarily in the Dixie Valley area and some areas that we weren't able to assess. So we've also been made aware today that some people are fraudulently posting as OES and FEMA representatives. Please only call phone numbers provided by a vetted website, such as our own website, the Plumas County Sheriff's Office, or websites from OES or FEMA. And we're going to continue to make sure we get the information to the public as quickly as possible and provide those numbers. But again, if they're not vetted, you should not be calling them. Phase 1 household hazardous waste cleanup is ongoing. You can track the progress of that on the Plumas County website. As I've said before, after phase 1 is completed, you can return and assess your damaged structure. Due to safety concerns and hazards, myself and the county cannot encourage you to sift. Choosing to sift comes with safety hazards. If you decide to sift, use proper protective equipment like respirators, suits, goggles, and shoes. And again, as I've told folks, sifting can only start after phase 1 has been completed. You can find that information on the Plumas County website under Dixie Fire. If you go to the bottom of that page under DTSC, which is Department of Toxic Substances, you can click on or search for specific locations on there, and it will tell you if that's been completed. If you're unable to find that, you can also call the county's debris cleanup line at 283-7080. Again, that's 283-7080, and they can assist you with finding if your property has reached or if phase 1 cleanup has been completed. Again, if phase 1 has been done and you choose to sift, that is sifting only. You cannot clean up. You cannot start cleaning the structure up. There's a very specific process that needs to be completed for that, and I don't want folks to run into issues with potential ability to get FEMA or state assistance for cleanup, as well as exposing yourself to all the toxic hazards that could be in the cleanup itself. So a couple weeks ago, we started a trash service in Chester and Greenville. You will find that over the next week, that is slowly going to go away. The trash service is up and running now that we're lifting these orders. As those dumpsters go away, I ask folks to please make sure they utilize the dump service. As long as those dumpsters are there, you can still continue to use them. But I ask you this, when I went through Greenville today, one dumpster was completely full and there was trash being stacked on the ground next to it. Please don't do that. If there's no room in the dumpster, just take your trash back home until you can either take it to the local dump or we replace that dumpster with one that's empty. Those folks do not need to be cleaning up our trash in town. In closing, I know there's been a lot of information dispersed and there's going to be more to come. We're going to try to inundate folks with information at this point on cleanup and how quickly it's going and next steps. But I also ask that you continue to monitor our plumascounty.us or the Plumas County Sheriff's Office Facebook page. Those are the two primary sites that we're utilizing to get information out. And as always, I just want to thank the public for your continued support, all the businesses, my staff, the LEMA officers that we've had, and for, I know folks know this, but I have to mention it. The fire folks, they work a lot of long hours. A lot of the teams time out after 14 days. My staff and my entire staff have been working on this incident over 50 days. They have not had vacations. Most of them, if not all of them, have had 1 day off a week. So they're working 6 days a week, 14-hour days. So when you see them in the public, I would encourage you to thank them. I know that that's already happening, but this incident and the pressure it has put on my staff has been incredible. And my staff, from the jail to my support staff to my deputies, have answered the call every single day. And my dispatchers, I cannot thank them enough. So thank you.
Sir, there's a couple questions.
Yes, sir. Okay, so it's report on the phone and power service will be restored in Genesee Valley. So if you're having issues with the power in Genesee Valley, I would reach out to PG&E, and I wish I had that number for you, but there is a PG&E line that you can go on. My understanding is that if they are unable to provide power for you, they will provide generators. That's what they did for some of the locations in Greenville. And as far as the phone service goes, my guess is that that's just dependent on the poles that they've lost. And I would reach out to your phone carrier as well. I'm sorry I can't answer those questions better. What a row was. My insurance company had no idea what the row was. What do I tell them for Avenue? So the row is, what that does is it allows the state and FEMA to go in and clean your property. So as it's request for entry is what it stands for. And so if you, in all instances, folks, for recovery should go to your insurance company. And your insurance company will tell you the amount that you have to clean up your property. And you can either utilize the state program, which is FEMA in the state, or you can utilize an independent contractor. And an independent contractor will have you sign your own forms, not the ROE, but the state program requires the ROE so that they can access your property to start phase 2 cleanup. So there's kind of two sides to it. I don't make recommendations for either. I encourage folks to get all the information that you can on those and make your own educated decision. And there will be meetings over the next couple of weeks in Chester and potentially Greenville or Crescent Mills, where a lot of those questions will be answered. So I would encourage you to, again, monitor our web pages, and the information will be forthcoming at those meetings. So thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. The next speaker is the agency administrator for the fire and from Plumas National Forest, Chris Carlson.
Good evening. Chris Carlton, Forest Supervisor here on the Plumas and one of the agency administrators on the fire. A couple of updates to pass along. First, we've been getting some questions about the closures. Those do remain in effect through the 17th. Just want to make sure people remain aware of those. Those are out there for public safety. They're always evaluating when the appropriate time is going to be to lift those, and I know that as soon as possible we want to get those removed, but until then just appreciate people's continued patience. We've seen the conditions out there. and until we get some changes, I expect those are likely to continue, but we'll keep you informed on that. Also gotten a couple of questions about firewood. With the closures and then with the fires, we know that's impacting people, and I know we're not there right now, but eventually it will get colder out there, and I know a lot of folks in our communities depend on firewood. So first thing, we're going to continue making firewood available free. Second, because of the closures and the access issues, we're working with some of our partners to see if there's a way that we can facilitate getting some firewood made available to the communities. So we'll continue working on that and continue to get information out there, but that's something we're aiming to do. Couple other things, we're still in full suppression mode on this fire. However, we recognize there's also going to need to be planning around what suppression repair and post some of those post-fire or further along in the fire activities are to protect communities, public safety. Just wanted to mention our priorities are going to be along those roadways, making sure we're getting those clear and safe for people to travel, around infrastructure, and then taking the actions we need to take to reduce the risk of impacts to our watersheds and our communities, because we know that that's pretty vital. So couple other things to pass on. Sheriff Johns mentioned it. A year ago we did have that run for the North Complex, and just wanted to share a little bit. So a year ago we had red flag conditions with an historic wind pattern that came through, and that led to that sustained crown fire going 30 miles. Went through private land, public land, fuels treatments, everything, including a couple of communities with tragic results. That fire run was 20 miles beyond what any experts could have predicted, and all of the models that were available. It was 20 miles beyond what those models predicted. So that 200,000 acres in 16 hours was really, at the time, we called it unprecedented. We're seeing extreme fire behavior again this year, and I really just want to recognize that we're feeling a lot better. There's a lot of black on that map. We've seen these lines holding very well over the last few days, and I think that cautious optimism is important to maintain. We also need to recognize that those dry conditions for extreme behavior still remain out there. And so as we continue to fight this fire, be prepared if we do need to, I think, like mentioned, if there's the potential for evacuation, make sure you're ready to go. And let's keep in that mode until we get through the end of this season. And really appreciate everybody being prepared and being ready to help out, and the support for our fire crews and the sheriffs and the first responders. So thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Tonight's final speaker is our incident commander, Evans Quo.
Thank you, Toby. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Evans Quo, Incident Commander for Great Basin Team 1 over on the East Zone. On behalf of Nick Truex, Cal Fire Incident Management Team 1 on the West Zone, I would thank you all for attending, taking the time. I'd like to echo with Sheriff John's comment about not being surprised. This fire, over the life of it, the 50 some odd days, has shown a propensity for it to, just when you think things are starting to look good, something will squirt out, or we'll have a breach in one of the lines, and it's back off to the races. As you heard from the operations section chief report out on both zones, we still have a number of priority areas. Probably of most significant tonight is the fire activity on the north end of this fire. On the west zones, branch 13 and 16, for that portion of the fire that's pushing towards Poison Lake and approaching Old Station. So our thoughts and prayers are with our counterparts on the west zone, and we have been trying to identify some resources that we can push over to them to help them out. On the east zone, we still have the two main areas that we have not secured the actual perimeter itself. That's the Devil's Punch Bowl just to the south of Taylorsville, and the right below the escarpment on the west side where the fire came down. And then we're also trying to hang on to everything else that we've secured over the last few days in preparation for this next cold front coming in here in the next couple of days. One of the things that we spent some time doing, and I wanted to share with you our thought process, is we went through a risk assessment exercise for how we're going to engage on the Devil's Punch Bowl as well as on the escarpment. Both areas share a lot of similarities, and they're extremely steep, which is in of itself a hazardous to firefighters, not only from the rolling rocks and rolling logs, but also the potential for firefighters to roll down the hill as well and get injured. The other concern, too, is also if a firefighter gets injured on one of those extremely steep hillsides, how do we medevac that person out of there? Oftentimes, it takes quite a bit of effort compared to when firefighters are working on gentler ground or where we have road access where we can get ambulance and advance life support to them very quickly. So some of the things that contributed to the success there was we were able to knock the heat out of both the areas using helicopters, bucket drops on the Devil's Punch Bowl in the timber there, as well as in the lighter fuels up on the escarpment. Once we were able to knock the heat out, then it became more of just a very steep hillside that the firefighters had to work and navigate successfully, as opposed to also having to dodge fire. So we were able to bring it down to like maybe say like a 1 or 2 dimension hazard as opposed to 3 dimensions with the very active fire. The other thing we did was we asked the crew superintendents for all the crews to spend a good amount of time yesterday scouting the area out, looking at it, and assessing on themselves, because they know their capabilities of their crews and their comfort level of being able to go in there. So all that was done, and then the final part of the picture was we compared the risk of putting firefighters in there, which is still moderate to high, but we also compared that to the risk of doing more of an indirect tactic, where we were planning on using some indirect dozer lines around the Devil's Punch Bowl and burning that out when the conditions are right. Well, we're not really finding those right conditions right now with these periodic wind events that come through. So, and the potential consequence of that firing operation failing meant that we would then put not only Taylorsville back at risk, but also potentially East Quincy. Similarly, up on the escarpment, we looked at a number of different options of having it go indirect. And some of that fire that pushed down out the escarpment the last 2 evenings with those winds, it's like enough is enough. So by going in there and establishing that control line on the far west side on that ridge, we're able to cut it off. Know we had to cut off because we had boots on the ground securing that piece of fire, and then also start pushing firefighters across the open flanks through the middle to keep any more additional fire coming down, which is not to say we're out of the woods there, but we're trying to reduce that potential impact on the communities of Milford as well as public traveling on Highway 395. So for us, it's kind of an equation of a risk trade-off. The trade-off of putting firefighters at an elevated risk versus the longer-term risk to the public, as well as potential for these large fires to occur in the event we get a wind event. So for us, we felt like it was acceptable, but ultimately it came down to the crew supervisors whether or not they felt comfortable that they can pull it off. As operations Jeff Serber reported, all the crews were actively engaged, and they were reporting good success, and their comfort level was within tolerable limits. So we wish them well in their endeavors, and we'll continue to keep you all informed of their progress and their success. So we do have one question that we received online asking about, is the fire moving towards Portola? So I think as we talked about the other night, and as we mentioned, as long as we're successful holding on to the southern flank of the fire that's up in Dixie Valley, Dixie Mountain, Red Clover, and Turner's Ridge, if we can keep the fire from moving south anymore, which so far we've stopped the forward movement, and now we're just trying to reinforce those lines, then the threat to the fire moving in the direction of Portola keeps going down. If we start getting weather forecasts that are indicating a north wind, well, then that risk goes back up again. And really what it comes down to is how secure is this line, and is there any potential for interior reburning that might cause spot fires? So right now, since we don't have a northerly wind in the forecast and the success that we've had on holding that southern flank, yeah, I'd say the risk to Portola is probably been moderated quite a bit. So I'm going to ask Toby if we had any other questions. Looks like, okay, we do have another question. What are the projections for Milford during Thursday, Friday time frame? So Thursday, Friday time frame, we're talking mostly southerly wind flow, which if this was an active open flank right now, I'd say, yeah, that would be of a major concern. But as you've heard from both ops chiefs, we've had people from both sides of the fire working this area, and quite a bit of that heat has gone out. We're also trying to secure the ridge line on the escarpment to keep any further movement in that direction. So as long as that work continues, then we're hopeful that the wind event that approaches us with this associated wind cold front Thursday night into Friday will be less. And then there's always that potential chance that we may get the showers in the right area, which may not really make a whole lot of difference with the fuels, but the relative humidity should come up, which should tamp down fire behavior a little bit. So there are some things in our favor. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, if not, thank you all for joining us, and I'll give it back to Toby.
Thank you. If you have any more questions, please feel free to send us those on Facebook, and we'll try our very best to answer them. And the next meeting is 2 days from now on Friday at September 10th at the same time, 7:30. Thanks for tuning in.